Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Barbara Lopez, and I currently support the Center for Action and Contemplation in building relationships with outside partners within the Christian contemplative movement, and also with local community partners here in New Mexico. As we here at CAC build and nurture our emerging movement ecology, we truly believe that we function in relationship with others. There is so much work to do, and we are not in this alone. So I am very honored and grateful to be here today to introduce a valued CAC partner, Contemplative Outreach. Contemplative Outreach is an international and interdenominational community committed to living in contemplative dimension of the gospel in everyday life. They support the daily practice of centering prayer as a primary expression of belonging, which transcends geographical, cultural, and religious differences. This year at CONSPIRE, Contemplative Outreach provided a centering prayer workshop, which explores its principle that all beings are created with a basic core of goodness, which is capable of unlimited transformation and union with the divine. A recording of this workshop is available in the agenda tab on the conference platform if you didn't have a chance to attend it. So CAC is grateful for the work that Contemplative Outreach brings to the world, and with us today from Contemplative Outreach is Mary Jane Yates. Mary Jane is Contemplative Outreach's National Administrator. She has been a part of Contemplative Outreach for 12 years, serving as a prayer group facilitator, introductory workshop presenter, and retreat leader. She is trained in public health and has worked in the fields of social justice and community development in Canada, where she has lived for the past 30 years. She grew up in Nigeria, West Africa, and has a passion for cross-cultural and diversity issues. She is devoted to contemplative life through her centering prayer practice and as a nature therapy guide. Welcome to you, Mary Jane.
Thank you, Barbara. It's an absolute privilege to be here with you and with everyone who's online, hopefully from many parts of the world. I am from Contemplative Outreach, but I am also I live in Alberta, Canada, which is north of the US border. And thankfully in Canada, we have, it's become common practice to acknowledge the land and the Indigenous peoples of the land before any presentation that we do. So I would like to start my presentation with that acknowledgement. I acknowledge my interdependence and kinship with all beings, inclusive of other than human beings, from the cosmic macro to the nano micro. I acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of this land, whose wisdom we need, and my ancestors ignored, belittled, and tried to eradicate. I acknowledge I am standing on Treaty 6 territory of the Papas Chase and Métis First Nations. This is the waiting place and meeting grounds of many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and others. Edmonton was a real hub. This ground, this land was a hub for many Native communities. I also acknowledge the life of the boreal forest in which I live, of the prairies and the plains, of the Rockies and our watershed. The interconnected dynamic of the plants, animals, birds, the earth, the skies and water, all other human beings, their diversity, beauty, and fragility. And in acknowledging these beings, I acknowledge my dependence on them for the very air I breathe to enable me to speak with you. So a moment of gratitude for all these beings. I also want to give gratitude, as Barbara said, for the amazing relationship that Contemplative Outreach has had with the Center for Action and Contemplation. There's a lot of crossover between us. I know a number of you participate and have been both to the Living School and attended a number of our introductory workshops, Lectio Divina, Centering Prayer, etc. So you may know already quite a bit about Contemplative Outreach, but you know, we have been changing quite a great deal, especially in the last year or two in the pandemic. And I've just been administrator since March of 2020, which you might notice was right when the pandemic started. Very gratefully, I was able to meet face-to-face with a few board members, the ones who had hired me, just before the pandemic came. But since then have been working virtually, really, with the governing board, my staff. There are about 6 of us, only one other, of whom I've met in person. So it's truly been a virtual world I've been working in. But so grateful for the many things that this organism already in a much deeper way has come to mean to me in the last 18 months. So I'm incredibly grateful to share some of our story with you. So we'll just move to the slides now. The first is just a title slide to remind you that this is really our emerging story. Many of you know that Father Thomas Keating, who founded Contemplative Outreach, passed away in 2018. And so we are in that process of transition and what that looks like. And it's an amazing, a very exciting time. Although we miss Father Keating deeply, we are seeing what he predicted, the many fruits of his passing on that are coming to be, many dreams that we know that he had that only now are coming into fruition. So just move ahead to the next slide. So the overview of my presentation is really talking about this question: who is Contemplative Outreach, and how does our work support varying levels of social action that we know are also of importance to the membership of CAC? So perhaps not surprisingly, I will address first the area of personal transformation that, of course, is part of what Contemplative Outreach is about. But also, I think you'll see through the other information I have to share that there's no real disconnect between all these areas of action, that as we are transformed personally, this is part of transforming the rest of the human race and indeed the cosmos, our relationships with other than human beings. So I think you'll see that in some of the slides that I present. So we'll just move to the next slide now, please. So to explain who Contemplative Outreach is, in case you haven't spent hours on our website, which if you're like me, I'd rather hear it from someone in person. So this is the symbol that has been part of our organism from pretty much the beginning. And the symbol is a very ancient one. It's called Job the Redeemer. It's a symbol of patient waiting associated with the life of Job, which we know from the Old Testament, certainly who we know endured very deep suffering. And so the outside circle is really that idea of how waiting is just a continuous process. We never completely arrive at who and what we're waiting for, but we wait, knowing that we wait in hope, knowing that the promise will be fulfilled, even if we don't see it right immediately. So in the middle, of course, is a cross, which signifies that this is a Christian, centering prayer is a form of Christian contemplative practice. It's certainly not exclusive to Christians. Other people are welcome to practice, but its roots come from the Christian tradition. The Alpha and Omega symbols above, again, relate as well a bit to the circle around the outside, that the spirit is really the origin. God and the spirit, or other, however you want to frame this other that we are attempting to relate to, is really both the beginning and the ending of our prayer. Contemplative outreach as a whole, we do not, what you would say, we do not try to proselytize. The whole framework for our work is understanding that it's the spirit that draws people into this kind of relationship. So it initiates those nudgings in each of us, and is also the ending of that practice. When we sit down for our 20 minutes or whatever other contemplative practice we're doing, the idea of the presence of God is both the source and the end of our pursuit. And the flowers underneath the cross really symbolize the fruits of centering prayer, the amazing shifts that can happen in consciousness, and I'll be talking a bit more about that later on, to understand that these fruits are seen in daily life, not necessarily in the practice itself, but they will come as we continue to sit. And the outside circle, I haven't spoken directly to these words, but these are the key values that contemplative outreach embraces: silence, solitude, solidarity, and service. We also had the word simplicity in there at one point. Maybe it just doesn't fit around the logo anymore, but it's certainly one that we continue to embrace. And so you'll see those values as well in some of what I present. I also wanted to tell you that most of what I'm presenting is based on the vision, the Contemplative Outreach vision statement, our theological principles, and guidelines for service, which are found on the website. So if you want this presentation in a nutshell, you could go and look at those, but that's only text there, and I'm going to give you a few pictures too. So next slide, please. So again, back to the area of social action that I know everyone in this conference totally believes is essential to right action, is the idea of personal transformation. And this is seen throughout our vision and our guidelines. Father Keating was known for bringing forward so strongly that teaching about our innate core of goodness. And I know for me that was revolutionary. That's what really hooked me into saying, I need to understand more about this practice and try to make it part of my daily life. So it's a matter of fact, I love the matter of fact way that Father Keating would state it. The indwelling divine presence affirms our innate core of goodness and is expressed fully in the theology of the Most Holy Trinity. And another one of our principles is that divine action is really about the healing process of transformation, enabling us to experience an ever-deepening intimacy with God and the practical caring for others that flows from this relationship. Well, this basically gives you everything in a nutshell, that yes, it's about personal transformation, but it's also that in itself leads to service. And just to really emphasize that idea of our innate core of goodness, I'd like to read a few other quotes, two from Father Keating and one from Marianne Williamson. So a quote from Thomas's book, Invitation to Love. The acceptance of our basic goodness does not refer to what we can do or do better than others, but to the goodness of our being before we do anything. Just going to read that one more time to let it sink in. The acceptance of our basic goodness does not refer to what we can do or do better than others, but to the goodness of our being before we do anything. Then another statement from Thomas in the back of Open Mind, Open Heart, which is sort of the Bible for centering prayer. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend. There are 42 guidelines for Christian life and transformation, and they make a wonderful set of statements to just practice, to dwell on and reflect on. So that number 2 is our basic core of goodness is our true self. Its center of gravity is God. The acceptance of our basic goodness is a quantum leap in the spiritual journey. And again, if you're like me and were raised in the kind of Christian culture that definitely didn't teach inner goodness, mostly about inner badness, this was a quantum leap in my spiritual journey to understand my basic core of goodness. And then I'd like to just finish this piece with a quote by Marianne Williamson, which again I think is extremely powerful. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. So again, I remember yesterday Richard talking about how we know something is true when we start to hear it being echoed with various other writers and wisdom teachers. And just to hear Marianne Williamson put it this way, and that resonating with our inner goodness, I think is a very powerful understanding for us. So next slide, please. These next few slides, I will openly say, are based on a content developed by Julie Saad, that's S-A-A-D, who is our current governing board facilitator. Julie has finished a book that she's been writing. It will be coming out in print in the next month or so, we hope. It's getting there. The name of the book is Contemplative Life, Discovering Our Path into the Heart of God. And Julie presented some of these concepts at a workshop in the summer, so I asked her if I could borrow her slides to really speak to, I think, these visuals give an idea of the process of transformation. So what we see here is what I think most of us can identify with as being the usual human condition. We have what may be a triggering event that comes either from outside or inside. Could be a conversation we have or just about anything. I think we've all had lots of triggers during COVID. And then what normally happens is as soon as something happens, we set up all these commentaries about it. What we think about it, is it good or bad? Huge amounts of judgment coming with our commentaries. And that, of course, leads to different kinds of emotions. And again, this could be something good that happens that we decide is extremely good, and then we're just set off in a direction of feeling really good, and that's wonderful. So the idea of contemplative, just to complete this slide, also what we're experiencing in the human condition, which is more and more, probably way more these days than when the early mystics were practicing. I would wager, I guess, they had a lot more external silence in the places that they tried to practice than what we have today, given the number of technological devices we have in our homes and the amount of traffic and other things. I'll come back to that later on in my talk too. But so this usual human condition of things happening and triggering our defenses and past hurts and many different emotions it can set off. So I'll just ask for the next slide, please. So the transformative process, as you see here, what we would say with at Contemplative Outreach is that centering prayer is sort of a foundational practice that can help with this dismantling process. So I've put these two clouds in to symbolize 20 minutes beginning of the day, which we recommend, 20 minutes at the end, or I guess I would say minimum of 20 minutes at both those times. Getting that into your schedule is the major hurdle. If you can get that sort of just scheduled and start to practice, then things start to, as we know, with any habit, it takes at least 30 days to get things established. So it's the idea of bookending or surrounding your day with these periods of contemplative prayer. Then as things happen during the day, some of these other practices, the welcoming prayer, the active prayer sentence, guard of the heart, can be used. These are all practices we teach at Contemplative Outreach, can be used to actually disengage, or not disengage, but create that space in the moment so that we step back, breathe, and center again in our core before we allow the rest of these reactions to start to take off. So it's like pressing pause to say, wait a minute, let's remember our center and who we really are, and to respond out of that innate core of goodness rather than our usual that has been built, the programs that have been built up over a lifetime, as Father Keating describes it. So that's just to give you a visual of what we would say starts to happen within the transformative process. So next slide, please. So just to reiterate, Contemplative Outreach offers these supports for a number of these practices. Centering prayer, of course, we have introductory workshops, but we also offer, we have a facilitator support team that provides resources for anybody who wishes to facilitate or start a centering prayer group. We also have what's called presenter formation to train people to introduce the prayer to others. Contemplative Outreach is really primarily a volunteer-based organization. That's how we get the work done. Our small staff are like, we're just behind the scenes, responding to what volunteers are needing, and the incredible network there is in many countries to support these practices. I didn't know a lot about before I became administrator, but I must tell you, it's incredible. Volunteers are the heart and the soul of our organism. So Lectio Divina, we have a Lectio Divina service team that also helps train people to teach Lectio, as well as offers workshops themselves and pamphlets and different, instructional approaches. The welcoming prayer, I'm hoping many of you have heard of that as well, and we have a service team to support that. The Living Flame program is actually a lovely approach to building in your centering prayer community. So this program is designed to happen over 8 months, and each month is a module on a different practice, centering prayer, Lectio Divina, but other aspects of contemplative life as well, such as discernment, soul friending. So again, the Living Flame program has a service team, and if your area or chapter or whatever group you're involved with is interested in hosting this program, then there are volunteers who are available to present those topics on those topics. Of course, retreats are foundational to what Contemplative Outreach, who we are and what we do. Usually if there's a centering, 2 or 3 centering prayer groups in any geographic area, there would also be once or twice a year retreats offered, say a weekend retreat, which is time for extended time in centering prayer, or what we call intensive or post-intensive retreats, which are 8 and 10 days, and really allowing that extra time of silence and prayer and teaching as well. I would say the foundational teaching that we offer is, it's called the Spiritual Journey series. So if you go to our website and look in the online courses page or the resources page, you'll find a link to the Spiritual Journey series, which is content that Father Keating developed, again, always in conjunction with prayer in community, the communities he prayed with, and understanding different elements of the spiritual journey. So that can be a very worthwhile resource. So next slide, please. So I would just like to take a moment and work with our practice of Lectio, because you've heard me speak for a few minutes. It's time for a bit of silence, I would say. So Lectio Divina, for those of you who aren't familiar with the practice, is really just a slow, reflective reading of a passage from Scripture, although there are other practices like Visio Divina, which involves looking at a scene, which could be outside. If you're, I know in my practice of nature and forest therapy, there's a lot of Visio Divina that goes on, just spending time. And the idea of really engaging your senses with whatever it is you're focusing on. So I would encourage you to do this now with this verse. I will read this statement 3 times slowly. And the movements of Lectio are really just listening. What does this passage say? Secondly, these reflection, which is sort of your imagination sense of thinking about what could this mean to me? What might, just any images, things that come to mind as you hear the words. Then there's the movement of the heart, which is the response that comes as we allow the silence to just bring us whatever it needs, whatever it would like to bring us. And the final movement is simply resting in presence, because again, presence we know goes beyond all words and all thoughts and all images. So I will read this slowly 3 times and just allow us a minute or 2 in between each reading to reflect and or respond or whatever comes to you in that time of silence. And I will end this at the end of the 3rd reading. I will end the silence with a chime so that you know we're coming out. So I just invite you to settle in a comfortable space wherever you may be right now. Just take time to settle into your body. Allow yourself to move down from your head, down into your heart, down into your gut, down into your seat, and through your feet, into the floor or the ground where you're resting. Just allow yourself to be grounded in the space where you are. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. So I invite you to come slowly back into the room. Look at your screen again. Or if you've been sitting with those seeds in the dirt, imagine what that feels like. Maybe you already have been. And if you have any responses or reflections that have come out of your time, you'd be welcome to share them in the chat space. Usually when we practice Lectio Divina as a group, we allow time for people to share very simply 1 or 2 words, what came to them. And I find that a very rich practice, because then it's our collective, what we've heard collectively in the silence, that can be so powerful. So I'll just ask for the next slide. So contemplative life, it's really about restructuring consciousness. And Father Keating he was a great student of all the sciences, but he loved to really look at what was the latest understanding, knowledge in brain science. And especially any studies that have been done related to contemplative or meditation practice. So I'd like to share what he says, again, in open mind, open heart. So not contemplative practice, but the contemplative state is the purpose of our practice. Not experiences, however exotic or reassuring, but the permanent and abiding awareness of God that comes through the mysterious restructuring of consciousness. At some point in your life, it could be in the middle of the night, on a subway, in the midst of prayer, the necessary changes in the nervous system and psyche finally come to completion. The restructuring of consciousness is the fruit of regular practice. So for me, I just find that completely so full of hope. And I know that the brain science actually does back it up, that our brains can create new pathways to respond differently to situations. So some ways you might notice this restructuring or the transformation process. Again, it takes a long time for some of us. And we feel, continually like we may have shifted at one point, but then come around and respond in exactly the same way the next time. And each time it's a matter of letting that go and allowing ourselves to go even more deeply, because letting go takes a long time. So we might start to notice less inner turmoil, more interior silence. Some of our commentaries start to quiet down. This is certainly one I've noticed, is that my emotional swings have started to diminish or disappear. This doesn't mean that we don't respond to things emotionally, but how we get caught up in them tends to change and not have the extremes that it used to. And then one that's extremely important for the next area of social action I'd like to talk about is the idea that we can serve others without getting caught up in their emotional pain. So we start to recognize the boundary between someone else's pain and our own emotions, so that we can truly respond with compassion and empathy and set our own agenda aside. I think most of us know that that's such a critical piece in taking genuine action and in serving others. So next slide. So the area of direct service, this again is referred to in our principles, our vision. The idea that as we develop a sense of oneness with others, that leads to deepened empathy, compassion. So centering prayer inspires ever increasing regard for others especially for the poor and those abandoned or exploited in the various throwaway cultures of our time. We also note in our principles that joining with others in the Christian tradition in service is one of the primary expressions of unity, a common ground for Christian unity. And then there's another guideline for service that I think is so essential, and I've seen it make such a difference in our organism to help prevent some volunteer burnout, I must say, because we know it's easy to take on a lot when we're passionate about a cause. But this principle that says all who provide contemplative outreach services do so in consideration of their personal, family, and professional responsibilities, which come first. So to illustrate this, I would like to have the video played now of that's on this slide, just to give you the experience of one of our younger contemplatives in this area.
I am 26 years old now, but I started doing centering prayer when I was 23. I think that incorporating centering prayer is critical. I mean, I know that I couldn't do my helping job that I do now without taking time to sit in silence. There's no way. I couldn't do it because it's too difficult. There's too much human need and human suffering that I can't handle it, and I want to fix it all, and I can't. So I have to sit in silence and hold that tension. Young people just want to do everything. They want to go save the world. And I think it takes people different amounts of time to realize that they can't actually save the world. And when they realize that is when they really need contemplation, because I think so many young people get burned out very young and very quickly, and they don't have a way to be calm and to realize that they just have to be, they don't have to do all the time. I mean, doing is important, yes, but it's not the end-all be-all. You cannot just be a doer. This is not possible without burning yourself out, I think, at least for me.
Thank you. Thank you to Amanda for sharing so eloquently of the importance of contemplative prayer in social action. So the third area of the framework, and I better hurry up because I'm not leaving enough time for questions. This is a key part of who Contemplative Outreach is. We define ourselves as a community, a living organism that is interactive and interconnected, interdependent and dynamic. And so when individuals may come to us to learn the practice of centering prayer, one of the first things we would try to do is connect them with a group that is in their own geographic area. That was pre-COVID. We still have a very long list of geographically based centering prayer groups and chapters, but now we have an extensive list of online contemplative groups, centering prayer groups. So I would just like to share briefly what our community looks like in 2021. So next slide. So as I said, we have lots of individual chapters. One of our key sister organizations is Extension Contemplative International, and they formed quite early on. Father Thomas did a lot of outreach to the South America, Latin American communities. And so they're very strongly developed in their service to Spanish and Portuguese speaking groups. And now I'd love to give you a little taste of some of our other groups around the world. We just finished a global conference where many groups, local groups, sent in these video postcards to give a little idea of what's happening in their community. So a few more videos now, please. Thank you. So that gives you a little taste of some of the diversity in our community. Just to add to that, we had what we called a community conversation project over the summer, where groups and chapters all over the world sent in just a bit of an update, what's happening in their community, so what differences they're observing, the impact of their work, and now what. So so this slide is of a group in New York State meeting outside a church, which is how they've been meeting as a prayer group when the temperatures allow, let's just say. So next slide. And a few more photos that came in from our story project. But just to look at the text underneath, these are some of the themes that we pulled together from that story project that really are telling us what's happening because of the move to Zoom and the different ways people are connecting now. So strengthen personal and collective practice, deepen listening and empathy for others. That it was especially true that any prayer group that I had the privilege to be part of over the last year, there was clearly a sense of compassion and understanding of what people are going through in different parts of the world with COVID. This one of praying across boundaries and language groups, that's where I would say COVID has really blown us wide open, as one of the board members likes to say. So one thing that's become very important to us in the last year or so is really looking at our translation work, how we are making the resources of Contemplative Outreach available in different languages. We've started up a translation working group that represents over 17 different languages to really support those translations going forward. And so there's a lot of work to do, as I remember Barbara saying earlier. So we're, just continuing in that. The excitement around the stories and in sharing in our conference last week, I think is really giving us all a renewed sense of vision of where Contemplative Outreach is going. So because I'm short on time, I think I'll just skip to the last slide and share with you some words from Father Thomas. I think we can just skip to the last one and share with you some words from Father Thomas that I really think will leave you with the flavor of who Contemplative Outreach is and who we are also growing in to be, lives surrendered to love. So if you could play that video, that would be great.
And that's all we have to do, ultimately, accept his love. It's receiving the compassion of divine mercy and letting it flow onto others, and doing this uninterruptedly. That is the transformation that is really substantial. It is right that I should think this way about all of you, because I hold you in my heart. You who are all partners with me in grace. In my affirmation or blessing, I want to thank everyone who has undertaken the transformative process and centering prayer in particular. May the next years see the increase of centering prayer and the creative addition of other wisdom aspects that might enhance what we're doing, or at least help us to do what we have learned out of our tradition with complete commitment. And this is my prayer, that your love may increase ever more and more in knowledge and every kind of perception, to discern what is of value, so that you may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, for the glory and praise of God. Let us enjoy the presence of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and allow ourselves to be loved unconditionally, and so be inspired to meet the real needs of everyone in the human family, past, present, and to come. Okay.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Mary Jane. I wanted to offer you just a couple of questions. There are so many questions from the audience. I want to be able to give you just a taste of what people are asking. So the first thing would be, do you need a certification to start a contemplative prayer group? This person would love to share what they've learned of contemplative prayer, but they hesitate that they may not do it adequately or correctly. So,
Yes, this is a great question. You don't need to be certified to start a centering prayer group. Honestly, we've tried to keep our certification, those type of formal requirements to a minimum. So the only formal training that we do ask is if people want to formally present a workshop on centering prayer to a number of people, there is a training to be a trained presenter of centering prayer. But that's not necessary to have that. If you want to start a group, say you've been introduced to the practice by someone or by reading a book, there are so many resources online that you could gather your group together. We actually have an online introductory workshop that you could use if people are new to it. And just, go for it. People are so wanting silence and contemplative practice. So to just initiate that with others is a wonderful thing. And then if you want more formal resources, someone to come, for example, to do an in-person introductory workshop, that's always very useful because it does allow people to ask very in-depth questions about the practice. So hope that answers it.
thank you. I'm going to offer you one more question and then give you an opportunity to close out for yourself, and then I'll close out the room. But do you have any thoughts on how churches have incorporated a contemplative focus into their worships or programs or ministries?
I have a few thoughts. I've seen some beautiful examples of how churches are doing that. There's a church I've been a part of in Edmonton has a minister who has a very deep contemplative heart. So, for example, in the pastoral prayers of the people that would normally be part of the church service, he would allow for several minutes of silence. And, for me, because I've been a churchgoer all my life, it's really offering that spaciousness, right? I find even when I'm in churches now, the way we say the Lord's Prayer is far too fast, right? Let's just slow it down, allow ourselves to really be even in the spoken words that we're hearing. And so churches, I think, who are allowing for more silence, for a different pace, for just that idea of resting together rather than trying to pack everything into a service and make it one more, what's the word? Entertainment, really, which many churches unfortunately are doing, to recognize that it is everybody's, the space that each individual is bringing to this service is what will allow for the Spirit to be there, not the words of one particular person. Hopefully that makes sense, but there are some examples out there. So
That's wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for all the questions, everybody. Beautiful questions and comments. I'll make sure you have them, Mary Jane, so you can see what all of them are. But do you have anything you want to close with?
well, I just want to say a huge thank you. Barbara, it's been wonderful to get to know you a little bit more through this process. And I look forward to meeting with Michael a bit more in the next year or two. You know, there's our four main or sister contemplative organisms, WCCM and Shalem Institute. And I guess one of my key visions as administrator is how do we continue to get to know one another and understand the real complementarity there is between our organisms? Because I feel, you know, as you said, Barbara, there's so much work to be done, so much sharing, and we each have our unique niche. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing our relationship.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mary Jane. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for what you've shared today, and thank you for the service and the love that you bring to the CAC and our community, and to all of your community as well. And again, I myself am very grateful for the work that I get to do with you, and how we can continue to bring our communities together in relationships. So your presence here is a great blessing to us all. Thank you. Thank you, Mary Jane.
Thanks. Blessings on the rest of the conference, too. I'll be tuning in.
Thank you. And I want to invite the audience to visit Contemplative Outreach's partner page on this conference platform with more information on their programs and resources and their community.